Parenting is taking its toll on our mental health. That's not just an opinion, but an official warning from the U.S. Surgeon General. Parental stress and burnout is a serious issue in our country.
I think it's important to recognize that validating that experience and doing that in company with other parents who are living that same thing, there is power in that.
We talk with a clinical psychologist about what stresses us out the most and how we can take steps to minimize burnout.
We can start to have conversations about how much time you have, where you want that time to go, and I think about it like a pie with them.
And need a little inspiration? How a Girl Scout decided to create an army of stuffed animals to help other kids going through trauma. That's today on Mom Squad. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle, and I'm sure you've heard by now the U.S. Surgeon General issued a new public health warning earlier this month. The 35-page report outlines how parents are so stressed out that 2/5 of those surveyed said they are, quote, so stressed they cannot function. Many sources and experts were used to compile this report, and they concluded that parents are now facing more stress than at any other point in recent history. When it comes to parents who have children under the age of 18, 1/3 of those parents rated their stress level at an 8 out of 10. 2/5 report being, quote, so stressed out they feel numb. 3/5 say they can't focus because they are so stressed out. When the report was first released, we asked all of you on our Mom Squad social media pages, what stresses you out the most? The majority said finances and childcare. So yes, those things can be controlled to an extent, but it's not as easy as taking deep breaths. Today, I sit down with clinical psychologist Dr. Tori Cordiano about what we can actually do about this toxic stress level. So the Surgeon General putting a health warning out there, talking about parental stress. What were your first thoughts, and what does that actually mean for parents?
Yeah, so when I first saw that, I was of two minds. The first is, I don't think there's any parent reading that for whom this was brand new information, right? We all know there's a ton of stress. We all feel burned out, overwhelmed at times. But then quickly on the heels of that, there was a sense of relief that this was being acknowledged and stated so publicly at such a high level, because this is not new, but it hasn't been something that has received true attention in this format before.
As we were sitting here talking, even before we started the interview, you mentioned the loneliness piece, because last year he talked about this mental health crisis of loneliness. And is this because of the way society's set up? Is this connected in some way? How do we connect those two public health warnings?
Yeah. So about a year-ish ago, the Surgeon General came out with a similar sort of statement around loneliness and the impact on physical health, mental health. And one of the first thoughts I had when I saw this parental stress and anxiety piece was that these are very much related. That even though in some ways we are more connected now than we ever have been, the idea that we can just reach out to somebody if we need a favor or a ride for a kid to practice, or we need to share something about a hard day, that for a lot of people feels harder to do than it maybe was 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, and when I asked more moms and parents on social, and I said, what is stressing you out the most? It was childcare and finances. Which I don't know if we can sit here and solve on our own, but how do parents approach that? If that is what is weighing on them the most, how do you start to approach? Maybe we start with the childcare aspect, since that might be a little bit easier to solve.
Yeah, and so some of these are big systemic policy pieces, and this is where I'm grateful that the Surgeon General has made this so public, that it does hopefully over time move the needle on big changes that need to happen. But it also, I think it's important to recognize that validating that experience and doing that in company with other parents who are living that same thing, there is power in that. Of course, it doesn't change the number of hours of childcare you have or the cost of living. None of that changes when we talk about our experience, but it does help us to feel less alone. And when we're working together and talking together about these things, we may have some creative problem solving. We may land on, wait, you're saying Tuesday nights you work late, and Wednesdays I don't get home until later. So I wonder if maybe we do a childcare swap. Right. So we may stumble into some small solutions that way.
Yeah, and it's funny, times I feel stressed out the most are the times where I'm trying to do it all myself. So when we take on that burden and we're starting to feel overwhelmed, what do you think is the first step that we take to relieve some of that burden?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of just grounding ourselves in reality. And one of the big takeaways from this report from the Surgeon General is that parents are both spending more time at work and more time with our kids than parents were, a generation ago. That math doesn't really add up in the way that would support our mental health or our overall well-being. So I think actually just first sitting with that and thinking about it like a pie and acknowledging we're doing more in each of these domains, that's coming from somewhere. It's coming from sleep, it's coming from leisure time, it's coming from social life. So to acknowledge that first is a good place to start, and it may then clear up for us some idea of where we can make some small inroads. Is it, I'm putting my phone away and I'm trying to get to bed a half hour earlier? Or is it, I'm actually holding myself to that, walk around the neighborhood with my friend that only takes 45 minutes, but really is such a bright spot in my day?
Yeah. So you have 3 kids,
I do.
Tori. I mean, do you feel the parental burnout yourself? Like when this report came out, were you thinking, gosh, I'm glad somebody is actually saying, like, this is what we're all going through no matter what? Did you feel like, okay, somebody's speaking to me?
Yes, and I think the timing of this, that it's that transition from summer to school year,
Yes.
I mean, it did remind me in some ways of how at the start of COVID, we were all experiencing this incredible amount of stress. And that analogy that was really helpful for me in framing it, and I heard many people say this isn't mine, but at the time of we're all in this same ocean, but we have very different boats, right? So some of us have boats that have more finances and more ability to have childcare and family around to support and jobs that are flexible, and some don't. So there are real barriers and real factors that would make this more or less likely for someone to feel overwhelmed or burned out. But I think that all parents, no matter their resources, their situation, feel that undercurrent of stress.
Yeah. I like that analogy. That is pretty, like, that's a great way to think about it. So then as a mental health professional, when you're feeling that overwhelming sense of stress and burnout, what is it that you do when you're starting to feel that? Because I know when I feel it, angry mom comes out, frustrated mom comes out, and then I don't want to be taking it out on my husband, my kids, my friends, anybody.
Sure.
So how do we, and I can feel it affecting my health. So what do you think we should be doing?
Yeah, I'll tell you what works for me, and I think there's not one right way of this, but what works for me is actually just when I feel that overwhelm or that stress start to build up, pausing myself in the moment and literally saying either in my head or out loud, pause or breathe, and then I do a little bit of deep breathing, and I'm talking 30 seconds, right? Because, the next thing is coming and you have to kind of pivot, but it does help to just reset and help me ground myself in the moment. And especially if it's an interaction with my kids or my husband, or it's something where I want to bring my best self to the situation, it can help me to be a little less reactive and to just, for a moment, ground myself and consider, how do I want to move forward here? Yeah. It doesn't work all the time.
Then do we also take a look at what's on our plate and have to take things off the plate, or... Because that's also hard to do.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. This is, I think, an ongoing struggle for most families, most people in general. What's really helped me around this is having my kids get a little bit older. So 2 of my kids are now at the age where we can start to have conversations about how much time you have, where you want that time to go. And I think about it like a pie with them. Like, this much is sleep, this much is school, here's what's left over. We have to bank a little bit for homework. What are the things that are most important to you? And it means sometimes turning down activities or opportunities that are really fun or exciting or could be enriching for them, but it would come at the cost of their sleep, their downtime. I will say I think that's a much easier conversation to have with my kids, but it has made it so that it's top of mind for me too, so that I'm able to look at my schedule and say, boy, this opportunity looks really cool, and yet I don't see a place in the pie where this is going to come from that's not going to compromise my sleep, my well-being, my family time.
Right. So more of a holistic approach of what is our reality? Like, what is it that we as a family can take on? Which then just made me realize I probably should have asked you about, when parental stress happens, how does that trickle down to our kids?
Yeah, so this is actually in the research literature very well documented from, and this isn't to, put this out there to scare parents or to say, this is one more stick to beat you with, but we do know that when parents are experiencing chronic or traumatic stress, that does have an impact on their children from the time they are in utero and through all the way through adolescence. So it's worth it for us, for our own well-being, but also for our kids and our family life to consider what are the ways that we can manage the stress. What are the levers that we can pull? We can't pull them all, but there are some things that we may be able to do to regulate our emotions, to take care of our own mental health and our well-being.
After a quick break, Tori talks about how your stress can affect your kids and the red flags to look out for to tell if it's more than just the average burnout. Welcome back. We are talking about the recent public health warning from the U.S. Surgeon General about the dangerous levels of stress that parents are facing. If you're just joining us, 2/5 of parents surveyed said they are too stressed to function. Parents are now working more hours than in previous years, and the cost of childcare has risen 26% in the last decade. That's according to the White House. All of this leads to more stress and strain on families. So what can we control? Clinical psychologist Dr. Tori Cordiano explains how to approach the burnout. I keep seeing research pop up. I mean, now in the age of Instagram and social media, I see graphics pop up all the time of research shows your kids don't need to be back-to-back activities. What they actually need is time with you.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking as we're talking, and we're talking about taking things off the plate, it's so easy to add one more thing, but then that is something that costs more, that costs more time. Do you see truth in that kids will get stressed out if they have back-to-back activities? Are we doing them more harm when we sign them up for all these things we're driving them around, we're getting stressed out, they have more things to do?
Yeah, and I think this is very individualized. I mean, your kid, right?
Yeah.
And every kid is different, even within a family. A family has a limit of this, but each child also has a limit. And you can see, I think about my own kids. One of them needs a lot of downtime, and one of them can go a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it's a constant calibration, but every child, and I say child and I mean teenagers too, needs protected downtime. And they need it when they're young for play, they need it for relaxation. Of course, play is going to look different as they get older, but the need for that does not go away. It might go from playing Legos to shooting hoops, but it's still, that need is still there, and we need to help them protect that unstructured downtime.
True. And in the same way, there are parents that are built that way.
Sure, yeah.
Like some parents need more downtime. Some parents thrive maybe on the go. But let's talk about, I know it's usually called mom guilt. I'm sure dads have guilt too, but the mom guilt, because, let's say, you're a parent who might need more downtime, but you have that guilt of your son or daughter wants to sign up for these 5 activities, or maybe you have to work 2 jobs and you're not there for your kids. And you have this guilt. I mean, the guilt is probably in whatever form it's happening in your own family. I feel like that is also the one thing that, as I talk to friends and other parents, it's the guilt of, gosh, I'm not providing enough for my kids, or I'm not getting to do all the things they want, or I feel like I should be keeping up with these other families and I'm not. How do we handle that constant nagging guilt?
Yeah, so I think this is where having those social connections can really be helpful, because what I like to do in that moment is to think about, what would I say to a friend who is saying this to me, and what kind of response would I have? And always, it's going to be compassionate, it's going to be warm, it's going to be loving and acknowledging all of the things and all of the ways that they give to their family. And it's much harder for us to do that for ourselves. It's worth building that self-compassion, but as we do that, to bring that to some of our friends or our partners or whoever we have, that we can say, this is what I'm feeling so guilty about this, and then allow that back and forth to fill us up again. And then it's also helpful just logistically to think about, what are the values and the priorities for our family? We want to be able to provide financially for our family. It's really important to us that we have dinner together, or these certain activities are always going to be a priority that we're there. And not everything is top priority. It can't be. So there will be times that we miss things, but if we have a pretty good sense of what's most important to us as a family, we can let that guide us.
Yeah. Dinner together. That is one thing I keep hearing, like if you can do anything for your child and your own health, mental health, is have dinner together.
Yeah.
Like how does that affect the whole family when you do, maybe it's not dinner, maybe, you know, just because I know there's certain days we either have dinner at 4:30 or 8:30.
Right.
But that special family time, how does that affect them throughout their lives?
Yeah, it's a few different things. You know, kids respond really well to routines and consistency. Their brains come to count on this, and it helps to kind of anchor them. It helps them to regulate their emotions, to know that they can count on this space together. So there's nothing magic about dinner together. It could be breakfast. It could be, you know, you're sitting and playing a game. And the research is really clear that we're talking about more nights than not, or a certain number of nights. We're not talking about sitting down for a half hour every single night. So we can let ourselves off the hook for that. But the other thing that it communicates to kids is that we are making this a priority, that we are not going to let our busy schedules, our activities, our work, our phones encroach on this really important moment together. So we can talk about what's top priority for us, but this is how kids really pick up on it. They see what we are doing.
And I ask because should those be the things that we are prioritizing? I mean, that can be a hot dog dinner, as cheap as a hot dog dinner. Go ahead and buy steak if that's what's in the budget. But is that when we're looking at how our lives are structured and what we're spending our time and money on? I mean, are those the things that we need to be taking that deep breath and going, okay, well, maybe we don't sign up for this third activity because what's really important is the time to carve out together.
Yeah. And I think, you know, again, it's so individualized per family, but it can be compelling if your friends or your neighbors are signing up for those things. And it's so easy and quick to sign up for things now. You do it all just very quickly on your phone. But before we do that, to actually pause and kind of fast forward ourselves a little bit and think about, what is this going to look like on a Wednesday night in the middle of September? How is it going to feel midweek to have to shuttle another kid off to practice and then coordinate 2 different pickups and have it be right in the middle of dinner? And sometimes you may decide, no, this is important. This is what they want to do. We can make this work. But other times it may give us good information that we're going to sit this one out. We're going to prioritize this other thing, this together time, this meal together, and shift this one down the line. And it's important for us to realize that no season of, you know, rec softball or whatever it is the be-all, end-all for our child, and we can make those decisions. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with pulling back on those activities if it saves your family sanity.
Right. I do want to ask, because it seems like society has, you know, like the way we're raising kids is very different than the way my mom was raising kids, only because society has changed so much. And a lot of that is technology, is social media. And I know we've probably touched upon it before in Mom Squad, but in your opinion, is social media our access, parents? Because I've talked a lot about kids.
That could be a whole different
But like us, you know, we're just as hooked on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok as some of the kids. Do you think any of that is leading to the parental stress? Like, are we feeling keeping up with the Joneses type of?
Oh, sure.
You know, like
I
it
feel
used to be
it. I don't know if you
Pinterest
feel
mom.
it.
Yes, but I mean, is that subconsciously, do you think, leading to some of this parental stress?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. I think the big one is what you just mentioned, is that, you know, we're doing that thing of comparing our insides to somebody else's shiny outsides, right? So that's not a fair comparison. None of us are posting our ugly moments on social media. It's not really, you know, the medium that it's for. But we can really easily get tricked into like, wow, their Sunday looked so nice, and we spent Sunday just kind of bickering with each other. And, oh man. So that's a very real aspect. And if we find that we're feeling grumpy or grouchy or kind of drained after we've used social media, that's really good to pay attention to. You know, I've done that before, where I've just deleted the app from my phone for a week or so, because it just feels like this isn't really doing anything for me. And it also then communicates to our kids, like, I think when we do that, we should be pretty vocal about it. Even if our kids are years away from having phones or social media, we can say, gosh, I realize I just lost 45 minutes on Instagram and I don't feel very good now. I think I'm going to delete this for a few days. I just need a little bit of a break from it. It's good for them to see us making that conscious choice, and it's good for them to see how easily even adults can get pulled into that.
Yeah, that's so true. So what are the red flags? Because you kind of mentioned it with this social media, but if somebody is really feeling burnt out, and I know I've personally even gone through the, gosh, is this stress more serious?
Yeah.
You know, if it lasts more than a day, am I headed down a bad road, or is this just a couple stressful days? So what are those red flags that maybe somebody needs to really reevaluate what kind of help they need?
Sure, yeah, that's such a great question, because burnout is one of those terms that gets tossed around and we all say, oh, I'm so burned out. Clinically, when we think about burnout, we're thinking about a stretch of time of at least a couple of weeks probably, where we're feeling less motivated than normal. Maybe our sleep is disrupted. It's affecting like our mood, our anxiety. We're feeling overwhelming stress more days than not. And it's that kind of crushing level of, I don't see how I'm going to keep going, or I just have zero motivation. Now, we all have days or a couple of days where we could check those boxes, and that feels very true for us. But if we're feeling that for a more sizable stretch of time, and we're starting to see it impact our daily rhythms, our sleep, our ability to move through the day with our kids or at work, those may be some of the red flags that we'd want to look for.
All right. Tori, this was so great. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much we could talk about with parental stress. And I know we just scratched the surface, but that was great information.
Thank you for having me.
A big thanks again to Dr. Cordiano. And again, if you are feeling that your stress is overwhelming, make sure to reach out to a mental health professional. Coming up after another quick break, it is the pick-me-up we need. A little girl uses her stuffed animals to help other kids going through trauma. Welcome back. If you are ever a Girl Scout, you know part of the Girl Scout promise is to help people at all times. A Girl Scout from Spotsylvania County named Elizabeth Carniol created her Bronze Award project to help other kids in crisis. Photojournalist Shad Berry from our DC station introduces us to Elizabeth.
I collected stuffed animals for the back of cruisers so when officers know that they're going in for kids, that hopefully that they'll give them to kids who have gone through crisis, trauma, being pulled away from their parents, so that they know that they're not alone and have something to hug and love on.
There was around 150, and we were able to actually give all of them out to the deputies here at Spotsylvania Sheriff's Office. So they're no longer sitting in bags now, they're all in the vehicles.
It makes me feel good to know somebody actually thought about giving them to people and not just an officer thinking about just to make them feel better, a kid.
Elizabeth, you are an inspiration. So if you're a Girl Scout leader like I am, maybe this gives you an idea for an activity. And it's always good to know there's something good to do with all of those stuffed animals that fill up our toy rooms. Well, parents, I'm wishing you a week without all the stress. I appreciate you tuning into Mom Squad, where we try to take the burden off in some way. So please join our Facebook page, Mom Squad with Maureen Kyle, and on our new Instagram page, Mom Squad Show. That's where we can interact and discuss some of these topics. I'm Maureen Kyle. I'll see you right back here next week.